going to be the club meeting for January 2022. I'm sitting here with Derek Argotti. He has graciously driven up here from Raleigh. He's getting ready to move back to Pennsylvania, so I talked him into doing a meeting with us one last time before he leaves. He's going to be talking about wintertime fishing. For any of you that don't know Derek's been around since 2004.
Late 2003. I probably started fishing beginning of 2004 for Musky, so I got my first one in North Carolina down here. So,
all right, he's probably one of the most successful, well-regarded fishermen in the area. So make sure to pay attention to it. All right, okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Tim. Thanks for having me here and letting me do this. I hope this is you guys pick up some things on this. We all got our ways of wanting to do things and catch fish, and I got mine as well. And there are varied techniques that will put fish in the boat for you. I'm just going to share some that I've found over the years to work down here, specifically really in the mountain areas, North Carolina here, even in East Tennessee, even Virginia a little bit. And so in a lot of them, going to specialize in winter musky fishing on the rivers around here. So I know you could do some lake fishing. I haven't dabbled with that too much. Most of mine's been in the wintertime here. So a lot of my biggest fish have come from the wintertime in North Carolina, and I got a couple big ones over 50. One came from the Catawba River area that was in a few years back. Was in February, and then I got another one in early February out of the river here in North Carolina. So and so what I found throughout the years is some of these, let me rewind a little bit, some of these techniques, again, as I stated, they're it takes some imagination. Like, I think we all like to see that musky bite when it comes up at the boat, very visually, when that fish takes. I think that's why we all got into musky fishing, for those types of strikes. However, you have to, in the wintertime, you have to start to use your imagination a little more, because the visual strike is just not the norm in the wintertime from what I found. There are days when the water gets warm, fish will kind of migrate up in the water column in the rivers, and you can get some fish to take baits high up in the water column. But predominantly, I've seen that these fish tend to want to stay deeper. And so there's where your presentation has to change, and there's where your imagination has to change. We're all familiar with some of the glide baits and some of the stuff like this, and that run higher, and some of our shallow water twitch baits that run higher in the water column, and how you see them visually work in the column up there. And if you take those same baits and put them lower in the water column, that's what I found is where you got to get your presentation down deep, down on the bottom. I'm sure a lot of us here, we fish for other fish, in the rivers, probably before musky, whether it's trout, smallmouth. You've got some walleye guys around here. So we all kind of know that reading the water is a big part of this. And it becomes more crucial even in the wintertime. Some of these fish are relating to the bottom, structure on the bottom, and all these things. And one of the reasons that is because when you look at the way water flows and reading water, trout guys will know this, that a lot of trout will actually sit in the middle of the river on the bottom, because believe it or not, when that water is flowing downriver, there's actually frictional forces and current breaks along the bottom where fish, and the same thing happens with muskie. Took me a few years to figure it out with the muskie, but believe it or not, right in the middle of these rivers that we have down here in North Carolina, there are muskies laying dead in the middle of the rivers, like right under your boat. So I know I was a victim. I was guilty of it too. I shouldn't say victim, but you're working down the bank and you're casting to the bank. And there are fish on these laydowns, but there are a lot of structure on the bottom as well. And I'm talking dead in the middle, right where your boat is, right by your drag chain, and all these things. So in order to get to these fish, this is where these presentations come into. This is where some of my go-to baits have been some of the deeper diving crankbaits. I like a more suspending style. That will get you right down there on the bottom. I used a lot more metal lipped baits in my days because, believe it or not, especially in the French Broad River, and I wasn't aware of it until the first few winters I fished when it got clear. It's very rocky on the bottom of the French Broad River. I know the mud banks you see visually, you think continue down, but not really. It's mostly rocks and gravel down there. There are some sand spots and some areas like that that have a little more softer bottoms, but a lot of it's very hard bottom. And so with these baits, this was a Cisco Kid. Let me explain them a little bit. This was a Cisco Kid. This was an old Rapala I used to use. I'm trying to get up here and show you a little closer. This is a 9-inch version. This is a very small. I've even caught a lot of fish on smaller versions of these saltwater ones. This is a sinking style. Again, getting right on the bottom and crawling it down there is the technique that I found in the wintertime to really get these muskies to strike. And really, I think the biggest thing that really kind of elicits a strike from the fish is the bottom contact. Now, I know some bass guys, if you're a bass guy, and I'm not really one either, but you can bounce spinner baits off trees, and that same technique will work for muskies. But you have to think outside of that with other lures, especially in that presentation down on the bottom. Trying to get your lure on there and making that contact seems to be the best triggering thing for these wintertime muskies. They don't want to come up out of the column very high. They don't want to go laterally. They're and a lot of them get piled up in very small areas. Some of the first times I came down on the French Broad in the winter when it was so clear, I saw multiple fish laying together, like literally almost side by side, right in the middle of the river. And previously I would come down these stretches and cast the bank and never see a fish. And it took me time and time again to realize that why wasn't I seeing these fish? What was I needing to do different? What was I needing to do with my tactics different to get these fish? And that was getting on the bottom where they were, because they didn't want to come up in the column. Even and it sounds crazy because we're going to talk a little bit more about the French Broad than maybe the Catawba River, where I've caught a lot of fish too, doing these same techniques. They don't want to come up. The French Broad is relatively shallow. I mean, some of the deeper holes are maybe only 10 feet deep. Most of them are probably 6 and 8 feet. So you're talking fish that really don't want to come up even 2 or 3 feet off the bottom to come chase a bait. So this is where I found that these winter tactics for these fish, you have to get right in their zone. Their zones seem to shrink down a lot, and you have to get in their face. So there are other lures out there that could get you down there and do the same things. Some of the rubber baits, like the bulldogs. I got one here. I've caught a few fish on these. Walking these down on the bottom, hopping them right along, and that kind of stuff. I caught a few fish on this one. I have a blue one. I got a nice fish out of the Catawba a few years back, 48-incher, doing the same thing, basically throwing it out there in these deep holes, just literally letting it land on the bottom and hopping it, and just hopping it and hopping it and hopping it back, and then coming up on the retrieve to the boat. But there, if you can get down and make bottom contact, or any structure, a lot of times there's logs down there too, making that contact with the bottom or any other structure is what's really getting these fish active and motivated. Like I said, there are days when it's warm, they'll move up in the water column, and you could get them on the glide baits. But even with the glide baits, it's kind of the same thing. And we're going to get into what the cadence. Even with these, the rubber baits, the jerk baits, the triple Ds, any of the big crank baits, or the cadence changes in the winter. That's another big thing you have to really realize. Spring, fall, it might be more of a snap, 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 snap. I find in the winter, it's really like a snap and a 3 count. A snap with the rod to twitch that bait and a 3 count. That really hanging and that pause is really what kind of adds to the whole illicit strike and getting them to move on your bait and getting them to attack. That I found was one of the biggest things that made the difference of me getting a fish and me going home without it. And the other thing you got to realize, so with the hellhound, or I'm just going to refer to that bait as a glide bait, but that family of baits, the same thing is true. It's a tap of that rod, let that bait glide out. And really, before you tap it again to make it glide, concurrently the other direction, it's really letting it hang there, really letting it get down there in the water column, you know. And so that's the thing. I've had probably more multiple fish days in January and February than I've had in the rest of the year. May is another month. I've caught a lot of fish in September. Sometimes you get a lot more multiple fish days, but believe it or not, the winter can be dynamite. Now, the thing that you have to consider, you're not going to run and gun big long stretches of the river like you would maybe in the summer, you know, or in the spring when they're migrating for spawn. I think there are some migration where these fish tend to hole up in some of the deepest, slowest pools, but you really got to put your focus on these spots and sometimes really pound them. One of my biggest fish, 50 I got out of the river, we'd come through that area, fishing it with deep cranks, fishing in the middle, fishing all different directions. And then we're gonna get into that later about casting angles. But one of the people, my brother was fishing in the boat with me. He had that fish come on with his bait. He was like, it was a big one. And we came back an hour later, right towards dark. A snowstorm had come in, and we had weather change. We had twilight change, you know, daylight changes. And I switched on to basically a big rubber bait, and I threw it right down the middle of the river and hopped that thing right on there. And I mean, that fish, when I landed her, my bait was completely in its mouth. I mean, gone. So it takes a lot of time to really focus on smaller areas, and really, the bite windows are small, so you have to put your attention where you know fish are at. Again, these are all advanced things. This isn't something like newbies, you're going to go out there and just start banging lures on the bottom. You got to start with already a bunch of know-how and a bunch of stuff here. So a lot of these techniques you have to visualize. You have to be able to already know where fish are at. You have to already have good, pretty much technique in reading water and that kind of stuff. So these are a lot of things that come into play before these techniques can even come into play, before you can try them. So, but yeah, so you know, those are some of the techniques that I've learned that really work here. One other part with this, like I mentioned with catching that one big one I got out of the river, I've caught a few other big ones very similarly, where I knew these fish were in these areas, and I really fished them multiple different ways. You know, basically fishing the middle of the river going downstream. Also turning around and casting back upstream and getting that bait to come down and dig with the current and making bottom contact where that fish may be facing upstream, and you're getting that bait to come whizzing by them to make them react. So it's cast angles are a big part of this in the wintertime fishing. They seem really specific certain days on how they want to bait a certain direction, a certain style, and definitely, like we talked about, a certain cadence, which when it comes to winter tactics, your cadence really has to slow down, whether it's with your big deep diving cranks, your rubber, or your glides. It's all about your cadence. One thing I could say, try to think of the 3 count. That has helped me more than anything else. You tap that bait, count to 3 before you tap it again. Leave that bait in the zone as long as you can. So to do that, you know, that's why some of the heavier baits work better, or some of your mid-suspending baits will get you down there and in the strike zone a little better. One bait that probably breaks that mold is a Bagley's. I've used over the years, caught a lot of fish on this. It's a very buoyant bait with balsa, but they have a leaded lip, so they want to roll down and float down a little bit. Often I use a big heavy metal leader with that, so that helps me get down into that zone and stay down there and suspend there right in their face and do that. So these are some tips and techniques I hope you guys can, you know, use and you know, get some more fish down here. And don't be afraid of the cold weather. Obviously take some precautions with gloves and the icy conditions and you know, that kind of stuff. But winter could be dynamite, and you know, from a casting standpoint. And so, yeah, you know, I've dabbled with, I know there's a lot of fly guys on the sites. I'll address them a little bit here. I've caught a few on the fly in my time. It wasn't something I really messed around with a lot in the winter time, but I did start to at the end. I had some success, but I think it takes a separate technique there trying to do this with a fly rod. You're really going to have to use a lot more weight forward lines, really fast sinking, tippets there, and to get down there to get that same presentation. Because again, it's getting down there on the bottom, making contact, visualizing your lure, dancing around on those bottom rocks, bottom sandbars, bottom logs, and listening the strike. And that's really what you got to do. I've had some success even trolling for them in the river, trolling upstream with some deep crankbaits and running them over the rocks. There's some areas in the French Broad and in the Catawba where there's rocks out in the middle of the river and drop-offs in areas where these fish hang, where typically it's hard to get to them casting. And one of the best ways is to troll and get down there. And again, I'm trolling very slow, using these same baits. These use deep diving crankbaits. I know Wayne comes to mind with me one day. We trolled up, I think, 2 or 3 fish one day, caught one casting, trolled up 2 more in a very short period of time in the river. So I think we lost a couple other ones. I know he lost. I think he lost one on one of the Bagleys. Maybe it was me. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, getting these baits down there, bottom contact, crawling them along the bottom, slow cadence. These are the things that you should take away from this. That hopefully will get you a fish or 2 in the boat. I know it's worked for me for a lot of years. It's put a lot of my biggest fish, one out of the Catawba, one out of the French Broad, both 50 inchers. Using a bottom contact type of method. Again, I've gotten several other 47, 48 inchers doing the same techniques, as well as a lot of other, larger fish in the systems doing these techniques. So, like I said, whether it's flies, I'm not going to leave you guys out, or your glide baits, or even your trollers, or your casters, there's something for all of us to be learning here and take away a message from this. And yeah, hope I didn't talk too much and bore you too much. If you got any questions about maybe a little more gear or a little bit more fine-tuning things, you could ask some questions on the website, and Tim will send them back to me, and I'll try to get them answered accordingly. About just rods and things like that I use, or leaders and line, and those types of things. But yeah, hopefully this has been informative, and again, you guys could take something away from it. Thank you for letting me talk, Tim. I really appreciate it. And yeah, with that, happy musky hunting. Yeah.
So we always get asked to put our Musky Club meetings on videos, and this is the kind of presentation that you get from a Musky Club meeting. Not always to the top end of Derek Argotti's information here, because this is a quite advanced presentation and compared to what we do on a regular basis. But that's part of coming to a club, is to be part of that camaraderie and being part of more than just a Facebook group. So take that in consideration as we go forward with what we put online for everybody and what we don't. As another thank you for Derek, put this together. With my luck, it'll probably show up backwards in the video.
Geez, Tim, you didn't have to do this. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Wow.
It's 18 years of, by the time I come to the club, Derek was already down in Raleigh, so I didn't get to see him at too many club meetings, but run into each other a lot in the waters, and he's always spent some time with me on the phone and helped me out learning some of these tactics for catching muskies, and we all appreciate that. So, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for having me.
All right. Come to a meeting sometime, guys. See you later.